So, thank you everybody for coming to the Bologna Book Plus 2 p.m. session with our ambassador, our author ambassador, Neil Packer. He needs a long introduction, but I think we're going to get to it just because I think many of you are here because you probably know who he is and you know what his work represents to our community. And Neil, why don't we just begin? Well, I suppose I should say I'm your interlocutor interviewer, Ed Nawotka. I'm with Publishers Weekly, which is the trade magazine of the global publishing business. And it's 152 years old this year, so it's shockingly.
Well, happy birthday!
Thank you very much. I feel.
You don't look it.
You know, the youth belies the age, but I suppose the first question is: have you ever been an ambassador for anything else prior to this particular august experience?
No, but I think as my publishers would tell you, it's gone a little bit to my head. So I've now elevated it to Emperor Nero style. So, no, I haven't ever been, and seriously, it is a huge honor. It really is. I mean, I'm humbled to be asked, and surprised as well to be asked. But it's what is really nice is it's opened up a few sort of opportunities like this as well to talk about work, so which I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I really am I'm enormously grateful. So.
Just laying out in front of us, we have some of the more recent highlights of your career, and how when you succinctly introduce yourself to people at cocktail parties who aren't aware.
I don't go to cocktail parties.
Well, fair enough. So it would be
so
very
people
succinct.
Even have them anymore.
Yeah. How do you describe the arc of your career, sort of in a rather succinct manner, when you're trying to be brief but charming?
It was a sort of inverse arc in a way, because I got very lucky very early on in 1984, and I had a book published by Methuen, and this book was based on an old music hall song. About a farmer's boy who has lots of chores to do and he gets them all mixed up. And I lost a job. I actually started off as a designer, as a graphic designer. I studied graphic design at Colchester, which I was immensely grateful for, actually, because there's a lot of design in my work. I mean, I wouldn't be able to make this sort of book without that background. But at some point, I lost this job, and I found myself with some time on my hands, and I'd always hankered after being an illustrator. So I one summer I put some ideas together, took them into Methuen, who were a very old-fashioned style publisher. They had Winnie the Pooh, Wind in the Willows, you know, those were their. And I literally, I think. In my mind, I walked out the first meeting with an agreement, which I mean, it wasn't quite like that. It was, you know, but it was pretty easy, and I thought it was all going to be like this. And of course, that book was an immense failure. It absolutely bombed. And then I just spent a long time struggling as a jobbing illustrator, just doing the sort of things that all illustrators have to do and go through, which is the endless editorial stuff, being asked to work in other people's styles, which is like a proto AI. You know, I mean that's really humiliating.
Well, what do you learn from failing so early and relatively dramatically for yourself, and then also from being imposed to work in and serve other people as an illustrator, in a sense, you know, cooking for other people's dinners?
What did I learn from it?
Exactly.
Well,
if anything.
It was interesting but I do feel I felt very bad about having to work in other people's styles, because you are treading, you know, it's their thing. So I would generally try and push. If I'd been asked to, say, work in the style of Chloe Cheese, whose work I adored and I loved, and at the time she was an immensely talented illustrator, my first question was always, well, why haven't you asked Chloe to do this job? To which I already knew the answer, and the answer was, well, Chloe's a brilliant illustrator. She's too expensive, and she's immensely busy, and she probably stopped doing work like this years ago in any case. So then I could either say, no, I don't want to do it, or I'd take it on and then spend the next week trying to push it as far away from Chloe's work as I possibly could, and I would be in and to and fro with, with whoever the client was. But it was a great learning process. Those difficult times, they teach you patience, and also if you're obsessed enough, you can. It'll get you over those.
It reinforces your own motivation to succeed in your chosen field.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how it was for years, and there were periods without work, and then gradually little bits of advertising work, which were a bit more lucrative, started coming in from the States. But really, the turning point was Folio Society when just on an off chance, I happened to walk into their offices with a folder under my arm, which you would have to do in those, that you would physically carry a folder around. And I would have left that portfolio probably with 5 other publishers that same week. But that was the beginning of a 30-year relationship with Folio.
When was this, and what was that first book?
So that was I, Claudius, which, if memory serves me right, was about 1991, 92, something like that. So,
okay. And the first title, do you remember?
It was I, Claudius. Robert
Graves. Yeah.
And then after that, I did Claudius the God, which is the second book. But I think I think often when people are asked to do books for Folio Society, you get very nervous about it.
Well, how do you explain does everybody out there know what the Folio Society is? No. Yes? Okay, some do and some don't. If you may, I'll try to describe it, and we can be...
Well, Folio, they've actually, it's a different beast
than it
now
used to be.
What it was then. Back then it was a book club, effectively, but a very well-known book, and they produced very beautiful books like this. But I think you would have to, am I right in saying you'd have to buy several a year? Yeah. So
like a subscription membership for very expensive, essentially bespoke books that were done in limited editions that were pricey. These were so maybe £100 at the time, several £100 now for a single title. So truly exclusive editions.
But really a great honor to be asked to illustrate. And an absolute joy, because there was nothing really else at the time like that you could, you'd be asked to do 6, 7, 8 illustrations per book. But I overindulged, I think, with those first 2 books.
Okay, and how did you
Because
overindulge?
I threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at them, and I look at because I don't think I was ready. I don't think I had a voice at that time. But that changed, and the turning. So the first book, the first work which I did, which I was immensely proud of, was Name of the Rose. But I think the reason for that was because of the book itself, because of the nature of the book, because of what it is, and because of the references. And I'd love this book in any case. It was, and actually that's what Folio do really well, is marry up book with illustration. And I think if you get that right, you're halfway there.
Well, how do you we'll talk briefly about Folio, because we certainly want to address your own work as well. But the illustrations you've done for Folio have ranged from I, Claudius to Divine Comedy, as we see here, and most recently you illustrated Shakespeare, a very limited and pricey and quite extravagant edition of Shakespeare. How do you approach this idea of illustrating a classic? And because I, Claudius is the Roman emperor, and this was sort of famously done as a television series that you would have probably grown up having seen.
I did grow up watching it.
I mean, so you're already approaching a subject early on that has a set of images associated with it, but then also one would think Shakespeare would be the least creative medium in some ways to illustrate, because it's constantly reinvented every single time it's
Yes.
performed. So
Yeah.
how does one draw something that doesn't change to illustrate a text that is in constant change? If that's
Because
my-
because I mean you mentioned the other day when I spoke to you briefly that the idea of a classic is it reflects, you can read it any time of your life and it reflects where you are
right
at that moment.
A classic being a book
Yeah.
you can reread that gives you a different experience
Yeah.
at each moment in your life as you're on a journey. The book evolves with you in a way.
But I think maybe probably the Claudius books, maybe they probably did reflect my thinking at the time, which was probably not a fully formed illustrator, which is why maybe I'm not so happy with those, because I look at them now and I can't remember what my methodology was particularly. But with Name of the Rose, I was in a much more comfortable place again, because of the period, because of the imagery. It's a book with extraordinary images. Also, I came up with the conceit in a way, because I managed to illustrate the entire book without once showing the two main protagonists. So
Right.
William of Baskerville and so his novice don't appear in the book. And there is a reason for that. It's not just a conceit. It's because the way that these books are paginated with the color plates, the first color plate appears about 50 pages in. By that time, the reader has got their own perfect image of both those characters, because it's such a visual. It's so beautifully written in a visual way. So you've all got your, and they'll all be different, and they won't be like mine. So in a way, I just came up with this idea. Well, let's take those kind of those 14th century herbals and the bestiaries and the books of hours, and let's just use that imagery as almost like a stage set. So you can put, you can project and the story, and maybe to point outside of the book.
Okay.
Because I can't bring anything more to it's all these books, they're all perfect books.
So it's not literal. You're giving room for the reader's imagination to fill in some of the imagery.
and room from Umberto Eco to sort of fill your heads with his imagery. With I don't want to. I mean, this is a problem with illustrated classics.
Well,
full
that's what I'm
stop
wondering.
in a way.
Yeah.
But that was a one way around it, and this book called for that. Other books maybe less so. I mean, with I did Catch-22, for instance, and I had a very different approach to that. I became very obsessive about detail. It's the only book I've really done that much research on B-25 bombers, and I mean, I could have probably flown one by the time I finished the research on this. But I also looked at American kind of advertising from that period and tried to put a lot of that stuff into that book, and that was a different approach. And I came at the characters sort of slightly sideways. Yossarian does appear in it, but it's not here is Yossarian doing this at this particular moment. And I've always tried to avoid that, which is very, that literal approach.
Right. Well, it comes up just briefly, or just to mention it briefly, because you are seeing a trend in the market out there. If you walk around, there's shelves full of illustrated classics, which are maybe graphic novel interpretations of classic books.
Yeah.
I mean, to what extent is an appropriate number of illustrations for a classic, generally? Because every classic comes with an illustration, which is the cover.
Yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not I'm in complete awe of people who do graphic novels. I mean,
Fair enough.
And it's an extraordinary art form, but it's on its own. It's not something I do. It's not something I can do.
Yeah.
And absolutely, of course, it's another way of doing it. This is more my comfort zone, if you like.
Well, then let's talk about the work that you yourself have authored and conceived. You have One of a Kind, which we would like to talk about.
Okay.
And
you can pass it around.
What's the inspiration for this? Because this is a much beloved book by illustrators in particular. I know love this particular book as well. So,
well, I made this I mean, I would say I made this book for my 8-year-old self, and I made this book for my 40-year-old self, reading it to my then 8-year-old son. But I also made it for teachers. I lived with a teacher for a long while, and I spent 17 years making teaching resources, and I wanted this to be the best-looking teaching resource out there. But also, again, it's a book that doing stuff which I really like doing is ideas that point outside of the book itself. It's a jumping off. It's a jumping off point. I was a visual learner, still am, but when I was a kid, this was the sort. I knew that this was exactly the sort of book that might appeal to me. I didn't. This was not a sort of any sort of marketing plot. I didn't think anyone would even be interested in this book. But Walker, and I've previously done the Odyssey and the Iliad.
Yes.
The Gillian Cross version for Walker, which is very different to this. And they'd encouraged me to sort of, why don't you come up with, do something of your own. So this was actually several ideas that had been knocking around for a long while. I mean, when I was again, when my son was tiny, I would trundle him around London in his pushchair. I'd have him 2 or 3 days a week while my partner had the sensible job, and she went back to work for 2 or 3 days, and I would be pushing him around. And we became obsessed with the municipal vehicles, the street cleaning vehicles. Well, I became obsessed.
Absolutely.
So I began sort of drawing these things for him. This would have been about 2003, 2004, and I put a little scrapbook together of all these little different liveries. Different types of, the permutations were extraordinary of this. And then I thought this might be a good idea for a book, but then I parked it at the back of my mind, and then there was other ideas that came up, but they weren't. These were good ideas, all of them, but they weren't. None of them were big ideas, and I was a long while sort of trying to work out how which one of these I should focus on. But at some point, I realized they were all the same idea, and it was ideas about classifying, sorting things, how we see the world.
That is the general conceit of the book: is classifications for objects and
how we how not just how we scientifically categorize them, but how we categorize things, how we sort sweets out. I mean, somebody said of this book, which I thought was really beautiful one time, that it's the child's collection in shoeboxes under the bed. Well, that was me. I literally had collections in shoeboxes under. They absolutely got it right. So it's trying to also, and then deconstructing the idea of how we sort things, because we can sort the same things in different ways.
Right. That's where the reader gets to participate in that, because they're going to resort those things in their own head a little bit. A child or an adult, obviously.
And it's a great jumping off point for teachers then to say, well, we can make perhaps
let's do our own.
We can do a lesson on this.
Yeah.
And I've seen it done. But this this was in my head. This was just a theory when I was making this book, but it bore out luckily, and it's.
And how, when you're working with an illustration that's going to be used as you say, a jumping off point, something for education purposes as ideal, how accurate does that have to be? And how accurate do you want? Because now the illustrated book is competing against just a barrage of visual media.
Well, there's a get-out clause at the end of this book, which is an apology in a way, which it may not be entirely accurate, but a book like this doesn't need to be accurate, because you can do that. You can, it's really there this is my version of accurate.
This is how you see the world.
This is how I see it. If you want to be pedantic about it, fine, go and prove me wrong. You no doubt will be able to do so, because I know there are mistakes in this book. I'm fully prepared to admit that.
Sure.
But that's not what it is. It's not trying to compete with the internet. And it's doing a thing that really, it's a bookish thing that only books can do.
Well, how do you define that? What is the bookish thing that only a book can do?
Because you can close it.
Yeah.
There's not a
I know
hyperlink.
it sounds like a
The
dumb
problem
question.
No, but the problem with the
I-
internet is infinite.
Sure.
With this book, hopefully you just end up inside your own head and imagination.
Right.
Not absorbing facts, but perhaps imagining facts. let's say.
It's fanciful, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also a self-contained world that you open and close on its own.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's the perfect.
The internet's
it's the
a lie.
perfect technology.
Life is not infinite,
Yeah,
but the book
yeah.
is a finite experience,
Yeah.
much like the
It's
day,
self-contained.
the units of time
There are,
in our lives.
I was pointing at that one. There's not, but Name of the Rose. There are worlds. I mean, Dante. That is the world. If you want to know the world, well, 700 years ago, it's all there. It's all there, and
So in this way, the one of a kind is a representation of your ability to classify
Yeah,
the world and give it a sense of order amid the chaos.
yes.
Oh, is that fair?
Well, no, because for me, when I was a child,
Sure.
the world was chaotic.
Well, that's what children.
and it needed some order. I needed this book.
That's why children like the order, because it's reliable and
Yes.
in a world that feels
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Well,
I
because,
think.
and then once you have that order, you can step away from it and bring in a little bit of fear, which children also like to do.
Okay.
But first of all, you've got to have the order.
Well, so let's talk about the new book. This is a book written for children or for adults, because it's in a sense very much an adult story. Let's how do you describe the name of the book, and maybe you could describe it for us. This book is also only published so far in Italian, correct?
And Korean.
Seriously?
And Korean.
And Korean. We
Yeah.
don't have the Korean version, unfortunately.
No.
but yes.
I've seen it. It's beautiful.
I bet
I
it
love
is.
Hangul. It's one
Yeah.
of my favorite
Publishers. Yeah, they do beautiful.
typefaces. I mean,
Yeah.
or not typefaces. It's a language. It's beautiful. It's beautiful text. Sorry, where were you?
The name of the book.
Okay, so in English, it's the parable of the independent baker. Again, this is another story that's very close to my heart, and it really concerns what has happened to. It's a love letter to the artisan, to the independent, not just bakers. The baker really is a metaphor in this book for other professions, but people who make things, with passion and have done so and have skill. Those skills that you learn over years and years and years. So in 2016, which wasn't a great year for me, I was being forcibly evicted out of my house because of the same forces that were going on. My favorite, so it wasn't a baker, but it was a patisserie. My favorite patisserie, which had been in London since 1926, and had been in the same family, had now got 2 or 3 outlets, and made the best quiche Lorraine outside of Paris, and it was fantastic. All of a sudden, it was bought out by a private equity company, and they wanted the image, they wanted the beautiful logo, they wanted the look and the feel, and they wanted the history, but they weren't interested in the product, and all of a sudden these things expanded, and there was 100 of them, and the quality, of course.
What was the name of the patisserie?
Are we allowed to say?
Yeah, go for
They
it.
might sue us.
Nah.
So it was Patisserie Valerie, which was. Yeah. So, which I loved, and I lived near the one in Marylebone, and it was one of my favorite places to go and eat. And the last 2 coffees I bought from there, I threw down the sink. They were that bad. And this happened literally within space of about 5 years of it being bought out by this private equity company. So I wrote this book in a flurry of anger, but it's not an angry book.
Understood. No.
It's not about that. It's more a love letter to, and it's a plea from the future, because I think here's maybe about 5,
Well, it's a
10
book.
years
It's a
behind.
book about a couple
Yeah.
who are older.
Yeah.
And they make the best bread in this little town that has many, many shops that make bread or different styles.
Yes.
Maybe not the best, but they're beloved.
Yeah.
And all the shops in the town are bought up by a giant bread conglomerate that makes mushy,
Limp,
tasteless, horrible
big
white
factories.
bread. Yeah. This actually, I'll have you know for a fact, I lived in Dublin for almost a decade after going to graduate school there, and the exact same thing happened with Irish soda bread.
Yes,
I'm
I
not
love
kidding.
soda bread.
Absolutely,
I love
100%.
soda bread.
The-
Wow.
all the little bakeries got bought up by a chain, and
No more soda bread.
Disaster. No, you could get it, but it
It's
was
like sourdough.
garbage.
Sourdough,
Yeah.
which I have issues.
So it's a true life parable.
Yeah.
And then the couple, it's a story about what happens when this couple, they're fighting the conglomerate.
Yeah.
They're turning them away each and
Yeah.
every time.
But they're old and they've been doing this for a long while,
Exactly.
and because now they're the last bread makers in town, everyone's coming to them and they can't keep up. And then the man from the factory comes.
The man comes.
Yeah.
Yes. The man who shall not be named.
And they,
Who does not get a name.
makes
Yeah.
them an offer they can't refuse. But there is a redemption.
Yeah.
Again, it's a kind of classic folk tale. This is written in the style of a folk tale. There's lots of repetition. In my mind, I had those East European folk tales that I grew up with. So I've tried to use that language because I'm not really a writer, but I just appropriated it as osmosis. And there's a twist because they come back. They make some bread themselves. The people of the town smell the bread, and they're reminded of the bread. And then there's a bread strike. They stop buying the bread from the big factory. Big factory goes out of business. No more bread in the town. No more jobs in the town because everybody had jobs in the big factory now. So the twist is that they then show the people of the town how to make bread. We'll give you our recipe. This is how it's done. People of the town begin to make bread. And some of those people are really good at making bread. And some of them open shops. And some of those shops are not as beautiful
Right.
as the original shop. But so long as the bread is really nice, it doesn't really matter about the fancy lettering. It doesn't matter about, the old quaint bakery. It's just, there needs to be good bread. And again, the cycle begins, and that's the hope. That's because it is a children's book, I guess. I wrote it.
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
But it's also probably in mind that adults might also buy this book to read to children. So, and I think you can have both. I think a book can be both.
Should a book be both? Because you have to. The parents will buy the book,
Yeah.
and then they're the ones who are going to have to
Yeah.
probably reread the book.
Well, it shouldn't
for some
always be
time.
both.
Okay. No.
But there's room for some books to be both.
When you approach that subject as an illustrator, because there's a great deal of care that was taken in production of this book. One, I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. The book was bound, printed.
Yes.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about the material, the physical.
Yeah.
The physical.
Which is what a book is.
Oh yeah.
And the smell of it too.
That's what makes it a
Yeah.
book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than just a story.
Well, in the back, and actually the backstory to this book is the same as the story in the book, because I found the most wonderful publishers probably on the planet here in Italy. Next, as well as Folio Society, of course, because they're both here. So, Folio mi Camera Zambo. So I was very fortunate. Actually, they found me because they published the Italian version of One of a Kind here. So I came here, and that won the Ragazzi, and there's also won a couple of it won the Anderson and the Cento Award as well, which is I'm immensely proud of. So I've gotten to know them very well, and I wanted to give them something that I had generated. So this story, which I'd written years and years earlier, suddenly I thought that because these people are artisans themselves. It's a tiny
Camillo Zampa.
I mean, it's a small publishing house, but very, very respected, well-known publishing house here in Italy. So, but you could get everybody in the entire office in a public lavatory cubicle.
In a rowboat. Yeah. In a Venetian gondola, perhaps. Yeah.
So it's small, but also, but on top of that, this book was printed at Grafici Venezia. Yeah, Okay. Who are the last industrial printers on the island of Venice? And Venice was it was the birthplace of the publishing industry.
Yeah.
And at one point it was thriving and alive with printers. There have been hundreds and hundreds of printers there, and this is the last surviving one. And that you chose to have it printed there is but also these people are extraordinarily good at their jobs. I mean, it's the most beautifully printed book, as you can see. Well, hopefully when it comes past you. I mean, it's so. I'm so proud of that, they have this beautiful printed on water is their logo, which is so romantic.
Yeah. Well, that's the time passed us a lot faster than I expected. But is there a question we could take from the audience or two? Does anybody have a question they would like to ask, either about the technique, production, inspiration? Or just the day-to-day life of Neil Packer. Yes, the gentleman is what we'll just call you.
Was this process when writing, opposed to just doing the illustrations, was that different? Well, probably, but did it affect your illustrations in a different way?
No, that's a good question. Yes, I guess it did, because I left room for illustrations because I knew this was probably always going to be an illustrated book. I mean, that was the point. I didn't know I would illustrate it even. It's, at some point I thought maybe someone else would, but I saw it. That's how I saw it. It was, it is quite a visual book, and so I left those gaps for the pictures deliberately, which is that made it an entirely different experience. But the pictures were there. I mean, as I was coming up with the story, and they've actually got names, these characters, which don't appear in the book, but I gave them backstories, and I gave them names, and the town, I can't remember what it is now, but even that had a name at one point. It's a bit like a film. You build this giant set, and you only show little bits of it, but the world has to be here, and then it makes it real and honest.
And then you pare it down just to enough story to go just in the perfect amount in the book. So yeah. Oh, well, now we're gonna.
Oh,
we have an award.
It's me. Oh, thank you.
Our ambassador. And but Neil, that's not all.
Cake.
There is also cake for you.
I hope
We hope everybody's going to join us in celebrating Neil's role here as the ambassador, and we have cake and.
Oh no, I'm going to be in all the pictures now. Oh no. We have snacks. We have snacks. We have drinks. We have cake. Please. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm
Whoa.
going to take the knife away.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, and enjoy. Come say hello.
Don't let me
Okay.
hear a knife.